we are going to go ahead and get started. So we're excited that all of you are here today for our first session in our virtual Innovations in STEM conference. We have a great lineup this week, so I think you're going to enjoy all of these, and hopefully, since we're spreading them out, no one will get Zoom fatigue. So, and I am going to turn the floor over to Dr. Alistair Windsor, who is the chair of our professional development committee on our steering committee for the STEM Hub, and he is going to introduce our fantastic keynote speaker and get us started.
Thank you, Dean Ivy. So as a first note to everyone, this presentation is being recorded. We'll be sharing it out later. This is to help our rural members, some of whom can't Zoom from home. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Meka Egwuekwe, who's a co-founder and executive director of Code Crew. Many of you may know Code Crew. It's very active in both adult and K-12 computer science education. Meka has a bachelor's degree in computer science from Morehouse College and a master's degree in computer science from Duke University. Without further ado, take it away, Meka.
Thank you very much, Dr. Windsor, as well as Dr. Ivy. I am certainly honored to be here today and honored to be your keynote speaker for today. And I certainly am thankful to the West Tennessee STEM Alliance and to the both of you and all of you who are present for allowing me to run my mouth for a little while today. And I'm going to start by issuing an apology. I thought by coming to the office, I'd have more reliable internet access, and it's down here in the office. And so I'm connecting to you by my phone. And unfortunately, that means I won't be able to show the slides that I had prepared. But hopefully you can bear with me, and I'll be sufficiently descriptive such that you'll still get the gist of what I have to share today. As was mentioned earlier, my name is Meka Egwuekwe. I'm executive director at Code Crew. We are a nonprofit that focuses on computer science education for kids and adults throughout the Memphis region and increasingly beyond. I myself am a former software developer of 19 years, most recently for Lokion Interactive, a small Memphis-based company that does interactive software development. But for the past 4 years, I've been the full-time executive director at Code Crew, and I'm someone who absolutely loves STEM. To share a little bit more about Code Crew before we get into the talk for the day, you know, as I mentioned, we teach kids and adults computer science education. You know, we directly work with more than 500 kids a week in schools in and around Memphis through in-school and after-school programs. We also train adults through a coding boot camp. But additionally, on the K-12 side, we are training more teachers to teach computer science in schools, and also focused on policy and advocacy. In fact, we were big proponents and one of the authors of the bill that produced Tennessee's first computer science education statewide plan. So in our talk today, I really was thinking of three primary areas. One is about the relationships within STEM. I'll be preaching to the choir because I know I'm amongst friends in that regard. But also some of the consequences of lack of STEM education. And then since my specialization is computer science, I thought I might spend a little time speaking about the specifics of computer science and STEM. And you guys are missing some amazing slides, I tell you, today. I thought I might start by actually talking about
I wanted to just check really quick. If you have a way to email the slides from your phone or something, I can run them for you.
Ah, that's a great idea. Let me do that then. Give me 1 second. I did proactively mail them to myself earlier. So,
Meka, can we share out the slides to people as well?
Absolutely, sure.
we're going to post the PDF versions of slides to our website at the end.
So you'll find that it's a 30 meg file, and so it will require downloading from Google Drive, but hopefully you won't have any trouble doing that.
I just sent you a request to give me access, so I think you got to click something.
Okay, I'm gonna do that then. Hopefully you got that.
Let's see. Yes. All right, so
Very smart. Stephanie's one of the smartest people I know.
we'll see here. Okay. All right, I think I have them. So let me get them opened up and then I'll share my screen and you can just tell me when you need for me to change slides.
Sure.
All right, so, okay, so I'm gonna share my screen now with everybody. And then we'll mute myself so you don't hear my dog snoring while you talk.
All right, well, thank you. Well, I introduced myself already. If you go to the next slide, that's me, and we can go to the next slide. This is basically, if you go back to where it says agenda. Yes, thank you. So in our talk today, we'll talk about the relationships. Again, like I mentioned, I'm preaching to the choir with respect to relationships in STEM, as well as consequences of a lack of STEM education, and then my own specialization, if you will, with respect to computer science and STEM. Next slide, please. And so some common misconceptions in STEM, which I find it sometimes hard to believe that we still have these challenges today, but I think they are indicative of not enough focus in this space. You know, one study that randomly selected 23 Harvard graduates, 21 of them actually got it wrong when they were asked what the causes of the seasons were. For example, these are Harvard graduates. You know, you look at many people just still to this very day not understanding that the Earth is round, spherical. It's an oblate spheroid to be specific, and but many people still think that the Earth is flat. And just a misunderstanding of scientific theory in general, right? That people think that you know, when you use the term theory in science, that you're talking about the opposite of facts, or you're talking about hunches, and that's not at all the case. And so these kinds of fundamental misunderstandings lead to challenges. Sometimes they're comical, but sometimes they have very real implications, and that can complicate the lives of all of us. Next slide. And so I thought I might just start by sharing a little bit about STEM and thinking about STEM as the interdependent entity that it is, right? That while we speak about science, technology, engineering, and math, they are intertwined and interdependent. And I know that we also speak of STEAM now by adding an A for arts, and STREAM by adding an R for reading. And I certainly agree those things are important, but I definitely understand too the synergy between these particular four disciplines in creating the 21st century learning opportunities for that all our skills, all our students need in terms of you know, the sciences and technology, engineering, and math. Let's go to the next slide. I'll elaborate on that by highlighting this kind of codependence, right? That, you know, I jokingly call this Mekaology. This is where, you know, I'm a bit oversimplifying what these entities are, but when I convey these concepts to kids, especially for them to understand that that science really is the study of observable phenomena, right? And we use that to make predictions and all kinds of things, right? And that math is the science, excuse me, the language of science. And that engineering is the application of scientific principles to build things, and that technology is an output of engineering, right? That's why these things are so interrelated, and so important for us, because if we go to the next slide, we are our nation is in a crisis, because world economies are increasingly dependent on strength in science and technology. At the same time, we've got fewer US students actually preparing themselves for these careers. And so when you look at businesses, you look at schools, and they're encountering these declines in workers and teachers. That's a very real problem if our country is going to maintain its competitive edge in the world stage. Next slide. But it's not just a national problem, it's also a local problem, because all of the concerns that we have from a national perspective are further compounded by challenges with respect to gaps with respect to race and gender. That's in Memphis, and that's across West Tennessee, and that's really a national problem as well, but it's particularly acute here in Memphis, given our and in West Tennessee, given our demographics. And it's really a numbers game. Because we can figure out a way to reduce the gap with respect to race and gender in the STEM space alone, it would radically transform our city and our region. That being said, we need growth in knowledge in STEM across all backgrounds. Next slide, please. And so, waiting for high school is proving to be too late. That the research shows that, there's research cited by Dr. Bill Blatters that says that many kids by the 3rd to 5th grade age range don't even believe they can be scientists. And when you look at minority kids, in particular females, they oftentimes don't believe that they can be scientists by as early as 2nd grade, and minority males by as early as 1st grade. Now, we know that not all kids will go into the science field, but certainly all kids need to have a solid background in science. But at the same time, we've got seemingly a growing anti-science movement amongst adults. Next slide, please. And there's a significant cost to this lack of STEM education and this growing anti-science movement. Right, we've got a denial that human beings are causing climate change, for example. These are the conditions for humans, conditions for animals are getting worse across the planet. Global sea level is rising, desertification is increasing. We're supposed to be stewards of the earth, not destroyers of it. But humanity is proving that it's quite effective at being destroyers of it, in a sense. And this is really rooted in a lack of fundamental understanding of science in particular, right? Fundamentally across all the branches of STEM, but particularly the science being that root that we spoke about earlier. Next slide. But climate change is not the only manifestation of what it's costing us as human beings with respect to a lack of STEM education, right? So we're in the midst of a worldwide pandemic right now. These numbers here are from this morning of more than 2.5 million cases just in the United States of COVID-19, more than 125,000 of our fellow Americans dead in less than 6 months. We're at a pace now where we are at risk of this perhaps being the #1 cause of death for humans in our country this year, surpassing cancer, heart disease, stroke, certainly suicide and homicide. It's already well surpassed those. And so we would never tolerate homicides on a scale like this, but we are experiencing a sort of political homicide in the sense of insufficient understanding of science and math in particular, right? That far too many Americans don't understand the basics of exponential math, right? It's hard to get our heads around that without sufficient education in it. But it doesn't require a master's degree. It does require more attention and focus in our educational system so that we understand those basics and we wear basic things like masks. I'm alone in this room right now, but well, we're not alone in this room. I'd be wearing this mask too. But sadly, that's not the only place where we have a cost, both a human and an economic cost to a lack of STEM education. If we can go to the next slide. We're also in the midst of a system that's built on continually persistent beliefs of concepts of racial superiority and racial inferiority that flatly have no scientific basis at all, right? Yet much of our housing, our policing, our jobs, opportunity, education, wealth generation, entrepreneurship, all these things are heavily affected by this. And we've got to learn to align our policies with what science tells us, right? That we're all created equal. Our very Constitution tells us this. Yet we are failing to accept that reality in practice with our policies as well as our behavior as fellow human beings. So with that perspective about the cost of lack of STEM education, I thought I might pivot into some perspective about my own field, and that being computer science and its impact on STEM. If we go to the next slide. Because we all will agree that we all live in a world where computers and software are changing everything, right? That if you ask kids today how much whether technology is increasing or decreasing in their lives, they will flatly tell you the obvious, that it's increasing. And so we're increasingly in a world where we need to have our education reflect that technological reality that we're in today. And it's not just for the foundations, but if we can go to the next slide, if we're going to, again, be competitive in the 21st century, places are all around our country, cities from our largest cities to our most rural areas, have to learn and get to where we train and mobilize our workforces for the 21st century. Next slide, please. And in particular, when you look at computing and its outsized impact, that there are job openings all across all the industries in every state. And forgive me, these are numbers, I'm sharing here that are pre-COVID-19 numbers, of course. But with hundreds of thousands, even millions of open computing jobs, at least before the virus, and we fully expect to happen again. It's been demonstrated and shown here by our friends at code.org that computing right now represents the #1 source for new wages in the United States, and that these jobs are projected to grow at twice the rate of all other jobs. Now, it's not just about jobs, right? We want to build ecosystems in our country, locally and in our country, with respect to jobs as well as entrepreneurship. We want educators, we want research in the space. But we've got to prepare our youth for it if we want to build those ecosystems. And we have to have a floor, if you will, of basic scientific understanding, and now basic, more specific than scientific understanding, basic technological understanding. Next slide. And so, as I mentioned, computing jobs are the number one source of new wages in our country. And then if you look very narrowly at STEM jobs, about a little over 2/3 are actually jobs in computing. Whereas in terms of STEM graduates that are being produced, just about 10% are graduating with college degrees in computer science out of all the STEM fields. And so there's a mismatch there, right, with respect to the demand and what we're producing in our educational system, which is why I think there should be not just focus on STEM. Obviously, we need to have a strong focus on STEM that we've been failing on for decades, unfortunately. But it also needs to be it also needs attention to where the demand is, and certainly in computing, there is a significant demand. With next slide, please. And we're doing this in the context of a reality that most schools are not teaching computer science. 90% of parents say they want it for their kids. Fewer than half of high schools even offer a computer science class. And so we've got some work to do in our schools. And if we go to the next slide, if you ask kids what they enjoy the most, now I love math and I love science. They don't get as much love as the arts and computing. And but what's great about both those spaces is that they contribute to more well-rounded students who then have a greater appreciation for math and science. I certainly personally root my own passion for math and science in my passion for computing and what I've learned from that. If we can hit to the next slide, there's a little message there. Just if you can hit the button, there we go. So there's a question, right? Why aren't more schools teaching computer science? Well, if we can go to the next slide. I'm sure all of you in the audience who are teachers and parents or any stakeholders are very familiar with this image. And that is that our school systems have been increasingly oriented towards testing. And I'm not here to demonize testing. I recognize how important it is. But there have been too many instances, and I'm sure many would agree, of testing impacting education, adversely impacting education, that in too many schools, we've got too much attention on preparing kids for the test and not educating kids. And so I jokingly say, I ask kids this all the time, that you know, they immediately recognize what this is, of course, and they are say, well, you're going to, you guys are all experts at bubbling. That this is a skill that no one else in the world can outperform our kids in our country today in. And the sad reality is, unless you're getting a job at Scantron, this isn't all that useful a skill any more than being able to count to 10. I mean, you need to know how to count to 10, but that alone is not going to get you to where we need to be. And so we need to give increasing focus to the fundamentals of science, technology, engineering, and math. And remember that our tests are, as important as they are there to measure how well we're doing in teaching those things, and not orient the teaching at the expense of education towards the test itself. I know I'm preaching to the choir in that regard. Let's go to the next slide. I like to reminisce from time to time. I started what was called junior high school then, back in 1985, 86, and at East High School here in Memphis. And when I took a computer class, that meant it meant what was on the left. It meant I learned how to program the thing, because the things on the right didn't exist. So, but in this time, our schools have had more computers than they've ever had, but fewer opportunities for learning about computing, learning how to make things, learning how to think computationally. We've got fewer instances than we did back in 1986, when before the advent of all these important skills, right? I'm not advocating that we don't teach Microsoft Office and that we don't teach internet, how to use the internet and email, and those important skills. Those are all important skills to have, but you're not going to get your entrepreneurs from those. You're not going to get your scientists just from those basic skills, right? And so that is what we at Code Crew, we increasingly advocate. And we can go to the next slide. computational thinking in particular is where our focus is, because we basically break that down into 4 basic areas. It's being able to recognize patterns. It's being able to decompose large problems into smaller ones so that they're more easily solved. It's being able to construct algorithms. I tell kids all the time, you already know what algorithms are. If you've done long division, that's an algorithm. But those, obviously it has applications far beyond long division. And then fourthly, it's abstraction and generalization. It is being able to encapsulate information. And all of these skills are necessary for computer science if you're going to be effective in that space. They're so foundational across all our subjects, especially in the STEM space. And so that's where the benefits of increasingly interleaving computational thinking into our STEM instruction benefits all across STEM, but it's also, again, increasingly foundational in this increasingly digital world in the first place. If we can move on to the next slide. This is a slide about our demographics here in Memphis, but they really are not limited to Memphis. They are all across West Tennessee and really across our country, albeit quite acute here in Memphis and in West Tennessee. That our largest and fastest growing demographics are these here, yet all of them are woefully underrepresented in computer science. In fact, all of them are underrepresented in STEM across the board. And so 20 years from now, what's true in Memphis and West Tennessee will be the reality for our nation also, that these will be the largest and fastest growing groups. If we can go to the next slide. But I'm actually not here to talk about politics. I'm here to talk about math. And this challenge is that I spoke to with respect to demographics and our need for increasing diversity in the STEM space is a mathematical problem. It is not one for politics as it is one for math. That if we are going to be competitive and remain competitive on that worldwide stage in the STEM fields, we must deal with the mathematical reality of our largest and fastest demographics being so woefully underrepresented in these spaces. But I see a future that is beautiful, that is reflective of that mathematical reality. If we can go to the next slide. I thought I might simply share this image from one of Code Crew's hackathons, one of our earliest hackathons, where all of these adults were mentors to kids in that event. Now our hackathon is the largest youth hackathon in the region. And it's on the strength of the diversity that you see in a picture like this, that it is achievable if we orient ourselves towards these basic fundamentals of a commitment to diversity in STEM, and then again, that fundamental of orienting our education towards the benefits of science, technology, engineering, and math, so that we can not suffer the consequences and these costs that I spoke of earlier, that were just a handful of examples that I'm sure many on this webinar can cite many more. And so this is what I came to share with us all today. And I presumed that there would be an opportunity to ask questions. I didn't ask about that, so I hope that's okay. If we can go to the next slide. If there are questions about anything that I shared, I'm happy to answer those or address those. I'm not sure what the mechanism is, if there's if we're going to use the chat or what that should be. But I certainly thank you all for the opportunity to share a few thoughts with respect to STEM, and especially innovation in STEM around this modern 21st century reality of this need for increased diversity in STEM, and this need for increased technology and its increased role in STEM, and our need for reorienting our educational system to be focused on education and less so on testing. Thank you.
I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and then bring everybody back so we can have more of a conversation. Alistair, how do you want to facilitate this? Would it be best for people to type into the chat that they'd like to ask a question and then you can call on them, or how do you want to do that?
That should work. I can do that.
Okay, so anybody with a question, go ahead and just type your name in the chat box, or if you don't have audio and you need to just ask your question, or don't have a microphone and need to just ask your question in the chat, that will work as well. And while we're waiting for those, I have one question to start us off. Well, the first one is, can we get your contact information from someone? So
well, that's great. I put that on the last slide, and so we could at some point maybe show that again.
Okay.
Certainly, yeah. So in terms of contacting us at Code Crew, and certainly you can contact me at Meka@codecrew.org. But we'll show that on the slide at I guess at some point soon.
So maybe
I'll
start with my question. So in terms of working with students around coding and computer science, what do you see as maybe the number one biggest challenge you have to overcome? And my guess is it's something in just their belief system, in getting them engaged. And then what is on the other side of that, what's the one thing that you see that really just sparks their interest and gets them excited?
Sure. Okay. So the number one thing to overcome is kids self-selecting out of computer science. It is exactly what you hit on. It is them seeing and believing that this is something they can do, right? So in our after-school programs and our in-school programs, especially after-school programs, we at Code Crew, the first thing we do is have them build something. Like if it's an app class, they build an app the first day, a 90-minute app. It doesn't do a whole lot. It's a single button with a picture of Dr. King on it that when you press it, it says part of a Dr. King speech. But it is, but they walk away having made an app that day, right? And recognizing that it's not rocket science to do this work. And so absolutely, that's the first thing, is getting kids to believe that this is something that they can do. And naturally, of course, keeping them engaged is also a challenge. You got to keep them fed, as once they get hungry for it, you want to make sure you still have the next level of opportunities and offerings for them. I think the second part of your question, if I recall correctly, was what was it again? It was the spark, you said.
What really sparks their interest?
Right. What sparks their interest? We find that them having something physical, hands-on, really sparks their interest. Right. So, whether it's robotics, Lego Mindstorm robots or Sphero robots or more advanced robots like Vex or some of the other things, right, really sparks their interest. We also find that drones. Oh God, they love drones. Especially, we teach kids to program drones, so it's not just a matter of flying them, but how can you apply computational thinking to these drones to get a drone to perform a task? And so they love those things. And of course, kids love games. I mean, even my own story is one of trying to make my own version of the Return of the Jedi video game back in the mid '80s. Of me getting into computer science. And so those kinds of physical things definitely spark their interest. And then being able to, I'll just say that being able to share with others what they've accomplished. Right? I've got a 16-year-old daughter, for example, that recently did another program called Code with Clossie. And she, it's by Carly Kloss, the model, who also firmly believes more girls should be in computer science. And so I love the way my daughter's face lit up when she was engaging with other girls to build websites in this case. And so she has a passion for it that her dad, who runs a computer science education program, couldn't give her. So those are some long-winded answers, if you will, to those great questions. Thank you.
Those were great. Thank you very much. And Alistair, I think there's now several questions over there in the chat.
Yes, from Karen McIntyre, she's asking, what kind of entry point would you recommend for underrepresented students?
Sure. So for us, I mean, I would recommend largely what we do at Code Crew, which is we actually introduce kids to making apps. We recognize that a lot of kids have Android devices. For example, MIT has a platform called App Inventor that's an educational platform for kids to make Android-based apps. And so we start that as an entry point for most kids in our program. And another great entry point, though, as I mentioned, is something physical, right? Sphero robots are a great entry point. Not only do the kids love them, the teachers love them, right? At Code Crew, we've trained teachers to stand up their own after-school programs in about a dozen schools in Memphis. And the teachers have been excited about it. The curriculum out there by Sphero in particular is excellent. And so those would be two great entry points, I think. I certainly would recommend if someone's looking to reach more underrepresented kids. I'll tell you, as those kids get more engaged, we started in a community center in the center of Memphis called the Lester Community Center in the Binghamton neighborhood, which is an economically challenged neighborhood. But we saw we were competing against basketball for these kids' attention, for example. We got kids to where they were learning how to program those credit card sized computers. And we challenged them to make automatic basketball scores for those. Right? And then we affixed those to the rims in the gymnasium at the community center. And then asked Elliot Perry, the former basketball star, to come and actually shoot to see which kid had the most accurate basketball scorer that they made programming these Arduino devices. So I'm saying all this to say that any instances where you can interleave or mix or take an interdisciplinary approach with the things that kids are interested in, be it with apps, robots, Arduinos, or whatever, those are always great entry points as well with kids, especially from underrepresented groups who, again, don't think that this is something for them.
So I have a question here from Levita Means. At what age or grade do you recommend introducing computer science? And I'll tack onto that. What does computer science look like in the elementary grades?
Sure. So the grade I recommend for beginning computer science is kindergarten. And it's really my thinking, and Code Crew's approach is heavily influenced by an international standard. And in the UK, they actually mandate computer science education for all grades K through 12, or our equivalent of K through 12. And so you can actually start introducing kids to computer science concepts as early as kindergarten by introducing things like, you can start introducing binary numbers, for example, to them. You can do unplugged activities with kids. You can also, especially as kids learn to read and write, you can actually do the kinds of unplugged activities that some of you may have seen, like having the kids write out the instructions for making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and then passing that to a human computer, their teacher, for example, and having the materials for a peanut butter and jelly sandwich there, and following the steps to see what kind of non-sandwiches actually get produced. It's quite fun with the kids. You can do that with paper airplanes, for example, too, right? So getting them to think and understand that computers follow instructions, and if it doesn't produce what you thought, it's because you did not sufficiently instruct it. And so helping kids to understand those concepts. As the kids get older and as they're learning to read, introducing them to block programming languages like Scratch are excellent. And then also introducing them to computational thinking oriented games. There's a great one out there called Lightbot, Lightbot, that I don't care whether the kid is 7 or 17, they get hooked on it because it is a platform where there's a character robot on the screen that you must program to go through a maze and turn blue squares into yellow squares. And each level gets more complicated, but what kids are learning there are instructions. They're learning about loops. They're learning about subroutines. These things that lend to abstraction, like I mentioned before, pattern recognition, like I mentioned before, algorithms, as well as decomposing large problems into smaller ones. So those are all things I would recommend.
Thank you, Meka. From Nikki Wallace, we have a question. How does a teacher secure funding to support computer science at their school?
That's a great question. So I think there are a lot of creative ways to do that, and I can't say that I'm entirely an expert on all the ways, but we have a presence in some schools that where the schools might use Title I funds for this purpose. You can also apply for STEM grants for this purpose. I think there really needs to be more clamoring and movement amongst our, faculty and administrators for just more dollars being allocated towards STEM and computer science. But those are some examples. You can also stand up. I've seen people do donors choose platforms, for example, where you can set up a campaign on donors choose and get materials funded that way. So there are a lot of creative ways, and I'm probably not at all exhausting all the different ways. There's a lot of interest though across the country, increasing interest, and so even large companies like Amazon and Google are increasingly paying attention in this regard. You may have seen, at least in Shelby County schools last week, there was a big announcement that Amazon is funding another organization called Boot Up to actually provide computer science education for a dozen elementary schools here in Memphis. And so there are a lot of different ways to fund. And again, I'm not sharing an exhaustive list, but you can get creative about it, and there are a lot of entities that are interested in funding for great ideas, and certainly, especially for those addressing these gaps with respect to underrepresented groups.
I know that one of the big barriers is the availability of devices, and for reasons completely unrelated to computer science education, we're trying to push out devices to every single child in the local school district. So perhaps there's an opportunity there. Sure.
And yeah, before COVID-19, I guess devices were a little more plentiful before everyone was trying to get them, right? That in fact, some companies would even just donate them, right? Or you can get funding to have those things donated. Now devices are a little more hard, a little more difficult to obtain, but certainly, yeah, the landscape for devices is I for one am happy to see this commitment that every child in the school system is going to have access to a connected device, and what that's going to mean for education henceforth, right? That we do not have to accept learning stopping because of a worldwide pandemic. For the first time in human history, right? We can put an end to that. If everyone is simply enabled with has access to a connected device. I'm not sure if I entirely answered that whole question. Forgive me if I left something out.
So we've got a question from Maiten Kalaskan saying, is there any scholarship opportunities for the students who want to study in STEM areas? It doesn't specify what level. There are lots of STEM opportunities at university level for sure. I can speak to that.
So scholarship opportunities, yeah, and I would imagine if you're looking for a scholarship, you're looking for something at the university level for the most part, or looking for support for an adult coding boot camp like Code Crew's adult boot camp. And there are lots of scholarship opportunities out there. I would say that the scholarship opportunities probably skew disproportionately towards the STEM fields because of the overwhelming need, and even more so towards computer science. And those scholarships can be anything from full scholarships down to small scholarships. In fact, Code Crew has a scholarship that we recently established in honor of someone that was on our team that we lost to COVID-19. And it's called the Christopher D. Fields Memorial Scholarship. And in it, we are committed to a $1,000 scholarship going to one or more kids every year in perpetuity. And so far, it's raised enough for several kids to earn this inaugural year scholarship. And so there are lots of smaller scholarships like those. I think there's even a website out there called scholarships.com that you can also go to for and very narrowly focus on the types of scholarships that you're seeking. And then for adult programs like ours, right now, if there are certain scholarships or certain funding. For example, today and tomorrow are the last days for this. As a matter of fact, that if you're an adult with a child 13 years or younger, you can actually get your full tuition paid for at our adult code school. And there are similar programs like that around the country. And we're hopeful that something like that happens again. This is in partnership with Memphis Bioworks that we're doing this. But we hope we can get more opportunities like that again. But those things come from time to time, but you have to do your homework and your research, unfortunately.
So a question from Meka Woodard saying, which companies donate computers or tablets? She says she's been looking since October 2019.
Sure. So, well, I don't exactly have a list of companies that just donate. I can tell you that we've had success from SAP. In fact, all of any adult that does our adult program, for example, they don't have to buy a computer. We give them a computer, and we're able to do that because SAP has given us computers. And so they have a process. It's a German company, but their US headquarters is in Philadelphia. And so we've had success through SAP. We're evolving our relationship with Samsung. We use almost exclusively Samsung tablets for our Android development. And so we've had some devices provided, but we'd like to have a more regular stream, if you will. And so we've not approached Dell, but I understand from Dell that they have provided free hardware to certain requests. I think they probably have more requests than they can serve. And that's probably true for most companies.
Yes, so there's a question from Joshua Fortier saying, out of the two programming languages, JavaScript or Python, which of these would you recommend over the other? And I presume in the context of education. Sure.
And that's a great question because I recommend them both, right? And I'll explain why, and then perhaps you can see what makes the most sense within your context. I recommend JavaScript because JavaScript is the lingua franca of the internet. You cannot visit a website without some JavaScript executing. It is now the most widely used programming language in the world. If you're within the context of education, if you want kids to prepare them for careers in this space, JavaScript is a great language to know. Virtually every job that when I was a professional software engineer, every project that I worked on, most of the projects I worked on involved some JavaScript. Python is great, especially in the K through 12, because if kids are going to study computer science in college, our colleges across the country are increasingly switching from Java and C and other programming languages to Python as the freshman one-on-one programming language. And they're doing that in part because Python it is powerful and it's used by professionals like anyone, like many of these other programming languages, but it's so easy to learn, so much easier to learn. And so the concepts from algorithms and abstraction right down to object orientation and all those elements they're finding that college kids are picking that up faster in a language like Python. And so that's why Code Crew, we're big proponents of kids learning both JavaScript and Python. Those are our chief text-based programming languages that we teach kids. JavaScript because it's lingua franca, and Python because we do want to encourage kids to pursue computer science in college. And we want them to get to college and have seen Python already. and not be introduced to it as a freshman. Hopefully that's helpful, at least for your purposes.
And I will put out a clarification there. There's a difference between JavaScript and Java. We've often used Java as our CS1 language, and we are moving away from that in the direction of Python. JavaScript, though it shares a name with Java, is a completely different language.
That's true. That's actually a marketing reality from the late 90s. Yep. Java was a popular programming language then, and then JavaScript, when it was invented, sort of played on that name to build notoriety. Little did they know that JavaScript would prove to be more popular than Java even today.
So Gans Crawford wants to know, how do we utilize your service or expertise in our STEM classes?
Sure. So there are a number of ways we could engage. If you're interested in our teacher training, reach out to us and we can do that. We this past school year, we trained more than 30 teachers, mostly middle and high school teachers, to teach computer science in their respective schools. But we have we're also friendly to elementary, also in terms of training teachers in that way. But also reach out to us, because we can actually at least point you to resources on how you might approach learning what you need. I'd love to learn more about your context, whether it's elementary, middle, or high school, what you're trying to accomplish with kids in teaching computer science. And then we can offer some advice or resources, even partners, to help in that way.
And a question from Nikki Wallace about COVID-19 online learning, and how do we advocate for changing the infrastructure in the city to allow for more high-speed internet?
Yeah. So how do we advocate? That's a great question. The word that comes to mind immediately is loudly, but there is increasing attention to that, and so I think a chief way to begin advocating is to align with some of these other entities that are increasing their focus in that regard, right? So there are I know that the Women's Foundation, for example, Greater Memphis, is involved in at least 3 different projects on increasing internet access to homes that need it, right? Trying to address that reality. We've got some zip codes at least in our area, and I'm sure in rural areas it's just as extreme, that 80% or more of the residents do not have broadband internet access. And that is a shameful condition, right? And that it meant that learning has stopped. And it meant, with COVID-19. And so, I'd say, definitely reach out to the school board. I think they're on board with it, as we're seeing that, certainly here in Shelby County, but I think increasingly across the state, there's recognition that we can't allow these long periods, this super summer slide that's happening right now, to happen again. And so to the point of your question of that we've got to make this a reality for everyone. We need to change the thinking about internet access from where it used to be a luxury, right? When, broadband internet when that started hitting homes, it was expensive. Only wealthy people had it. Then only middle-class people had it. It's where we evolved now, right? But we need to start thinking of it like a utility, right? And start advocating for it like a utility, right? 100 or so years ago, having a sewer line was a luxury, right? Now we don't build homes without sewer lines today, right? And we need to consider access to the internet in that similar vein, that it's no longer a luxury. It is a necessity for every modern home.
So one last question, I think, from Melanie Lynch. She said, could you mention the free program that ends tomorrow? I missed the name and how to apply.
Sure. So this is a program for adults. It's the Code Crew Code School, and it is our coding boot camp. It's a 6-month intense boot camp for adults who want to learn. I mean, you learn a lot, and you learn enough to become an entry-level software engineer. And then our target is to help you get a job that pays at least $50,000 a year or higher. We've had some get much higher. So that it's called the Code Crew Code School. If you visit our website or reach out to us at team@codecrew.org, or reach out to me, Meka@codecrew.org. I'm happy to connect you to how you apply for that full tuition scholarship, basically, that Memphis BioWorks is a grant from Memphis BioWorks is funding. Yeah, there it is, Meka@codecrew.org. That is me. Thank you. But it's the Code Crew Code School, and that is our single adult program. Everything else we do is K through 12.
Well, I'd like to thank you very much, Meka, for being here today and talking to us. It's been wonderful. And there'll be some more opportunities to engage with Code Crew later in July. We'll be reaching out with information for all the participants here later after the end of the conference. And we'll be meeting another one of the co-founders on Wednesday who's on our panel.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. Again, I appreciate you all for this opportunity to share a few thoughts, and please reach out to me at Meka@codecrew.org, or reach out to us at the Code Crew team, and we're happy to chat about this gospel of computer science education, as well as STEM in general. So thank you all so much.
And I want to echo my thanks. It was a great session today. We really appreciate you doing this for us. Thank you also to all the participants who are here, and we hope you're going to be joining us for some of the other sessions this week. Tomorrow we have the K-8 Digital Readiness Standards with Deborah Knoll and Brandy Stroker, so we're looking forward to that. We have a great industry panel on Wednesday called All Careers Are Tech Careers. We've got some really fantastic people, as Alistair just mentioned. And then Thursday is going to be more of a conversation format, but we're going to be talking about how we have adapted with the STEM Hub during this COVID-19 situation, and what we have in the works for supporting schools for the fall. We won't know, obviously, a whole lot quite yet, since we don't have the exact plans from all the districts in place, and we also don't know what the university is doing either yet. But we've learned to just go with the flow, and we are just figuring it out as we go. So looking forward to seeing everybody later this week. So thanks again very much, Meka. We really enjoyed that today.
Thank you so much as well. Take care, everyone.